the first time I heard the phrase white privilege. And I thought immediately it was a really effective meme. Because a meme captures an idea very quickly and virally, in a sense. Because growing up where I did and how I did, it was never a mystery to me that people were treated differently in this country based on the color of their skin. New Jersey was a fairly ghettoized, segregated place, and different neighborhoods usually had concentrations, at least in the 60s and 70s. Different neighborhoods had different ethnic groups predominant in them. So we knew the Italians were in Totowa, and the Jews were in Fair Lawn, and the blacks were in Patterson, and the Dutch were in Prospect Park and Haledon. And so everybody kind of had their ghetto. And when people would cross those lines, so for example in the 70s, because our church, like this church, was very diverse, there might be a church meeting in North Haledon, and if you were black and lived in Patterson and were driving from Patterson to North Haledon, which was all of 2 miles, you might get pulled over by the cops. And they'd ask, what are you doing in this neighborhood? And so immediately when I heard the term white privilege, I thought that's a good meme, but it's a little bit of a dangerous filter. And the reason I knew that was also growing up in Patterson and then working in a place like the Dominican Republic. I knew that these dynamics are contextual. For example, whereas if you were black and driving from Patterson to North Haledon, you might get pulled over. Once my sister got pulled over just a block from our house in Patterson for being white because the cop wanted to know if she was in Patterson trying to buy drugs. And so you can get pulled over for being black and you can get pulled over for being white. And then when I went to the Dominican Republic, I learned that, yeah, there's racism too, but the racism had all kinds of different nuances in the Dominican Republic. And especially my whiteness and my American citizenship had all kinds of different wrinkles. Because on one hand, I was often treated and had a certain degree of privilege, but I also knew in other ways there was some discrimination against me. Because there were ideas and tensions about Americans in the Dominican Republic, and there were ideas about it. So if I'd go into a store, and if they made me wait and let a lot of other people go around me in the store, I'd be like, what? Is it because I'm a gringo that you're treating me so bad? So right away, one of the things that I learned very quickly is that, there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of particularity about racism and how we treat each other. And in the Dominican Republic, for example, they had hosts of differentiators in terms of skin color. And I grew up knowing that in the black community too, because folks would talk, and she's blacker than he is, and then all the language, and some of you know all about that, and others of you don't know anything about that, because you haven't been in that situation. And, I grew up in Patterson, and I was, in the church context, often the only white person there. And when I worked in day camp, the little kids would come up to me and put their fingers through my hair, because they never got a chance to get this close to a white guy before. And if you're in the bathroom, going to the bathroom, they turn around and look because they wanted to see if you were really white all over. And so this is kind of what happens amongst people. And in the Dominican Republic, there were Haitians and Dominicans and some people with more European ancestry. And I'm sure in Brazil, you've got all of this racial dynamics going on in terms of skin color and all of these things. Lately, one of the buzzwords has been intersectionality. And what's interesting is a lot of people who bring this on kind of act like it's a compounding of the white privilege conversation, when in many ways it really undercuts it. Because the intersectionality conversation basically asks the question, how do you prioritize one victim aspect over a multitude of others? In other words, There's status that gets associated with race in different contexts. There's status and different treatment that gets associated with gender in different contexts. There's status about ability, about weight, about attractiveness, about intelligence, about height. You know that after the television era, all of our presidents have been over 6 feet, whereas before the television era, there have been many short presidents. So Reggie, you can, Reggie can announce his victim status about, height, that I use my height privilege against Reggie, but it doesn't seem to help very much in fantasy football. So he uses his fantasy football privilege over me. There's wealth, which we all are very accustomed to. There's clothing, there's hairstyle, there's age, there's geography, there's nationality, there's education. And in fact, what has kind of seemed to happen is that there's a race to the bottom in terms of victim status. So if you're a black, blind, trans man in a wheelchair, you're kind of the king over everyone, especially if you're poor, but no one would really want to be such a person. And in fact, I see this all the time because there are lots of different things. Whereas, if you know anything about Bel Air and you wind up bumping into Nina at Bel Air, that's one of the 2 places she goes. She goes to church and she goes to Bel Air. It's the only 2 places you're going to find Nina. But Nina goes into Bel Air and it's like, everybody knows Nina in Bel Air. Nina's welcome in Bel Air. But Daniel was banned from Bel Air. Why was Daniel banned from Bel Air? Well, a lot of it was because of his behavior, but a lot of it was also because of his dress. Because even if you're a white, heterosexual male and you walk into Bel Air looking like a homeless person, you're going to be watched and you're probably going to be thrown out. Whereas if you're black and to go into Bel Air and you're well-dressed and you look good and you know how to speak well and you know how to behave, you're not going to have any problem at all. In fact, the definition of racism is ascribing to an individual your assumptions of an of the entire aspect group. So if I could dress myself in such a way to walk into Bel Air or walk into another store that I don't frequent, and they would watch me and think, well, is he going to take something? Because he looks homeless. What's going on? Now, usually in our culture, we take the frontal assault approach, which is to denounce it and raise awareness and all of this. What's interesting about this approach is that a lot of people have actually known this approach doesn't work. For example, if they see suicide rates creeping up, the initial instinction is, well, let's raise a bunch of money, let's put a bunch of billboards up with suicide hotlines. Well, they've done studies of this, and one of the things that they noticed was that when they put up the billboards and plastered notes about suicide all the community, guess what happened? Suicide rates increase. When Barack Obama would talk about gun laws and there'd be some gun violence and said we should really do something about gun laws, guess what increased? Gun sales. And when Barack Obama would, and I'm just mentioning him, we can get into the political side, but I thought he had an incredible speech on race in America. After he gave that speech, guess what happened? Numbers of people who joined neo-Nazi and hate groups rose. But the opposite is true too. Every time there's, let's say, the Klan decides they want to march through a neighborhood, guess what happens? Contributions to anti-racism groups increases. So in other words, if your anti-racism group is running a little short of money, call the Klan. If they do a march through the neighborhood, all kinds of people are going to send you money. This is kind of the weird way this world works. So Ta-Nehisi Coates has been really, I think, writing a lot of perceptual things about it, but then another young African-American author, Thomas Chatterton Williams, wrote a very insightful piece in the New York Times basically saying, all this focus on white is kind of giving whiteness power. And in fact, in his op-ed, he noted that he contacted Richard Spencer, who's a neo-Nazi, and Richard Spencer's observation on Coates' work was basically this. This is a photographic negative of a white supremacist. He told me gleefully, this is why I'm actually very confident, because those leftists who are always talking about white privilege are going to be easier to flip. Now, if you know a little bit of black history, you might remember that we've done all this before. Because if you read a good biography of Malcolm X, you'll realize that he and Elijah Muhammad in the 60s were actually having secret negotiations with neo-Nazis because in many ways their interests merged. And they kind of put that away when they were starting to get some tension. And so you see, these issues are always with us, and they sometimes take shape in terms of race, they sometimes take shape in terms of class, they take shape in terms of just about any aspect of humanity you can find. Now at this point you might be wondering, well, why are we talking about this? Well, it actually has to do everything with the most famous story about Elisha. Because if you read this story with this perspective, you can begin to understand actually what the text is talking about. Now, Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. That's the land north of the kingdom of Israel. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now, there's so much in this verse that you should pause and think about, because one of the things was, why is God giving victory to a raider from the northern kingdom into Israel? Isn't Israel God's chosen people? Why is God empowering the raiders? Now, I don't mean the football Raiders, but it's really quite a testament to our peaceful, controlled times that we would actually use raiders as a mascot. Because for most of human history, raiding was simply a fact of life. You would raid the people weaker next to you, and you would take some of their people as your slaves. And this is what Naaman is. He is a raider. He comes in, and he takes goods, and he takes belongings, and he gives the king a cut, and he keeps some for himself. But now he's got leprosy. And leprosy in this cultural context is a social problem. And he's probably keeping the leprosy secret because pretty quickly we even maintain the word today in our culture, he will be treated as a leper. Sometimes we designate someone with skin color or with wealth or with a disease as a leper, because a leper is someone who is kicked out of the community and relegated to outcast status. And Naaman, who is a successful raider, is a favorite of his king, probably because he is more ruthless in stealing from the surrounding nations than anybody else, and he has leprosy. Now, the bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She was a captive slave. Now, again, according to our narrative, what she should probably do is be, putting a little arsenic in Naaman's drink to poison him slowly, or look for a chance to stab him in the night or something like this. But then she does this. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." Now, little girl, aren't you supposed to be an Israelite? Isn't Naaman's leprosy a win for you? Shouldn't you celebrate it? But here you're going to the people who have taken you from your home, enslaved you, at least made you subject to rape, if not it's actually happening. And you are telling them good things? What is this, some kind of Stockholm syndrome? So Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. Now, we should also pause here and recognize that who is moving the narrative here? It's the slave. It's the slave girl. The slave girl is moving the events in this story. Now, pay attention to this, because we're going to see this repeated in this story. Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. "By all means, go," the king of Aram replied. "I want to have you out there raiding and bringing in plunder to me. I don't want you having leprosy. I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver. 1 talent of silver was an enormous amount of money. 10 talents of silver was an extreme amount of money. 6,000 shekels of gold, another extreme amount of money, and 10 sets of clothing. He is bringing with him a caravan of wealth into Israel with a letter from the dominant king saying to the subservient king, get my raider fixed. Now again, if you think about it, in these terms, there's a lot going on here. Socioeconomically, racially, in terms of gender, in terms of wealth. A letter that he took to the king of Israel read, with this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy. Now again, this seems like, well, here's just the facts. But if you read the Bible consistently, you know that they pay dramatic attention to things. If the letter began with, my brother, could you help him? That would have been a nice request. This letter is a command from a superior to an inferior that's saying, I have a problem, you'd better fix it. And the king of Israel does not miss the subtext. As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes, which in that culture is an expression of, this is a catastrophe, because clothing was expensive. Rip it. This is not undone easily. He tore his robes and said, am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Now, what's interesting about that question is, can you kill? Yes. Can you bring back to life? No. Why does this fellow send me someone to be cured of his leprosy? See how he's trying to pick a quarrel with me? The king of Israel gets it. When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes. Now pay attention to the emotional stakes here. Who is panicking in this story? Naaman is panicking. He's got leprosy. The king of Aram is panicking. I have a problem. The king of Israel is panicking. I have a bigger problem. Elisha is cool. Elisha is composed. Elisha has himself together. Send him this message. Why have you torn your robes? Has the man come to you? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. Doesn't say he'll heal him. Something is going to happen here in Naaman's life. Now, Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Now again, pay attention to the language. It doesn't say Naaman went with his camels and his riches, although those are undoubtedly there. In a sense, Naaman drove his tank to Israel, and Naaman drove his tank to Elisha's house. Everybody understands what horses and chariots are for. Everyone understands that Naaman is implicitly communicating to everyone he is the big dog here, and his needs must come first. His needs are privileged. So Elisha sent a message to him saying, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored and you will be clean. Did Elisha go to the door? No. What's Elisha doing? Elisha is understanding exactly the power dynamics of this situation. And he's remaining cool and doesn't even go to the door, sends his messenger. Now, throughout this whole story, when the Bible tells stories, pay close attention to who speaks when. The first person to speak in this entire story, does anybody remember who it was? The girl. The slave girl was the first person to speak. Her words set up the narrative. Naaman hasn't said anything yet. The king of Aram has spoken. The king of Israel has spoken. Elisha has spoken. Now we're about to have Naaman's first words, and Naaman's first words are going to show us exactly what kind of man this is. But Naaman went away angry and said, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot, and cure my leprosy. Are not the Ababa and the Arphar rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? Isn't our country better than this place here because we are militarily superior to them? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? So he turned and went off in anger. In a rage? Who is Naaman? Naaman is possessed of all of his privileges. Naaman is possessed of who he is and what he has done. He has status, he has power, he has wealth, and Elisha doesn't know his place. Because what are prophets in the ancient world? They are sycophants who work for money to come out and give a religious show. And then everyone's excited, and everyone feels good, and you pay the man. And Elisha just sends out a little message and says, tip in the Jordan 7 times and you'll be fine. And Naaman's furious. Who is Naaman? Naaman's just like us. Full of what other status and claim we have. What am I excited? I'm tall. Go to the Dominican Republic. I have an American passport. I drive a car. I have money. I have wealth. I have access. Things get bad in the Dominican Republic. I get on a plane and leave. All of you can suffer here without me. I have options. I am entitled. That's who Naaman is. What's going to happen next? Who's going to speak next? Naaman's servants. Now, again, in our modern translations, we like to use the word servant. You know why? Because in almost all of these cases, servant and slave are the same word. And if the translators were to say slave, we'd all have issues. Slavery is endemic throughout human history. Naaman's slave. And again, the slave should say, ha! Yes, he didn't get healed. He's too stubborn. He's going to go back to Syria and die of his leprosy, and I'm going to enjoy it. The slave doesn't do this. Naaman's slave went to him and said, my father. My father? Why do you say my father? Well, this is how an inferior speaks to a superior. It doesn't mean he's his biological son. My father. If the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? In fact, the ancient world is full of great things that heroes have to do. How much more, then, when he tells you, wash and be clean? You're so full of yourself, you can't be healed. Well, pay a therapist thousands of dollars to get to that point. So he went down, dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored, and he became clean, like that of a young boy. You might even say he was born again. Then Naaman and all of his attendants went back to the man of God, and he stood before him. Pay attention to the words in the Old Testament. When you stand before someone, the supplicant stands before the king because the king is the judge. If you go to court, you stand before the judge. Now Naaman self-consciously takes the lower position, and now he stands before Elisha. You didn't see him before. He stands before Elisha and said, he speaks again, now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant. And we know that Elisha took gifts from wealthy patrons. He did from the Shunammite widow. We had that story a couple of weeks ago. The prophet answered, notice they didn't say Elisha, they said the prophet, because they're paying attention to the roles. As surely as the Lord lives whom I serve, I will not accept a thing. Because what he is doing is retraining Naaman about something foundational. He has already been born again, and now he is discipling him and training him about something foundational about what has just happened. Did Elisha come out and say words and move things over move his hand over the spot? No, he didn't even see him. what does Elisha want Naaman to pay attention to? And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. "If you will not," said Naaman, "please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down and he is leaning on my arm, and I have to bow there also, when I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this. Go in peace." Now wait a minute. This is exactly the kind of idolatry that we've just spent a long time in the book of Kings harping on Jeroboam and Ahab and Joram and all of these kings for doing. For setting up some little private shrine to the Lord or to some other god that shouldn't Elisha be schooling Naaman now in theology? And Elisha just says, "Go in peace." What kind of prophet is he? Does Naaman deserve a miracle? Is there no one to speak truth to power? Has Naaman renounced slave-taking and holding and Syrian tyranny? Does he say, "Oh, I'm clean now, all my slaves go free"? No, he doesn't. Is God and Elisha complicit in all of this? This story gets referred to after Jesus preaches his sermon in Nazareth in Luke 4. And Jesus makes this observation. "And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet, yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian." What point was Jesus making? Now, the residents of his town that just recently applauded his sermon were about to try to kill him. And Jesus makes this point about how God works. Well, someone in Elisha's household has an ear for justice. After Naaman had traveled some distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said to himself, "My master was too easy on Naaman. My master didn't make Naaman pay for his miracle. This Aramean," he uses his ethnicity, nationality. He highlights the tension between the two countries by not accepting from him what he brought. "As surely as the Lord lives," this is a vow that Gehazi is making, "I will run after him and get something from him. So I can do justice and get some cash at the same time. This is win-win. I can keep my moral status and my financial wealth." So Gehazi hurried after Naaman. When Naaman saw him running towards him, he got down from the chariot to meet him. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "Everything is all right," Gehazi answered. My master sent me to say," well, there's a lie. "2 young men from the company of the prophets have come to me from the country of Ephraim. Please give me a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothing." "By all means, take 2 talents. It's getting better," said Naaman. He urged Gehazi to accept them and then tied up the 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 sets of clothing. And he sent 2 of his servants, and they carried them ahead of Gehazi. Oh, this is good. The servants are carrying the wealth, and I get to walk behind. Then when Gehazi got to the hill, he took the things from the servants and put them away in his house and sent the men away, and they left. Now here's the funny thing about privilege. In contemporary language, the privilege meme kind of came up in about 3-4 years ago, and its origin can be traced to a prophet at Wellesley College. And basically its definition is this: the idea of privilege, that some people benefit from unearned and largely unacknowledged advantages, even when those advantages aren't discriminatory. That these privileges are unearned and unacknowledged. See, Gehazi has set himself as the arbiter in this moral economy. And Naaman's miracles, in Gehazi's view, was unearned. Naaman does not deserve to be healed. Naaman deserves to be ostracized for his leprosy and to die a miserable death. That's the death Gehazi wants for Naaman. And he is not happy that God healed him and Elisha complied. Gehazi stands in judgment over Naaman, Elisha, and God. So when he went in and stood before his master, Elisha asked him, "Where have you been?" Now these kind of questions appear in Scripture a lot. In fact, they start in Genesis 3, when God is in the garden, and the man and the woman are nowhere to be found. He says, "Where are you?" "We're hiding." "Why are you hiding?" "We're naked." "Who told you you were naked?" "Where'd you go, Gehazi?" "Your servant didn't go anywhere." Would you, if you worked for this man, would you really lie to him in this way? But he does. But Elisha said to him, "Was not my spirit with you when the man got down from his chariot to meet you?" Again, pay attention to the word. When the man got down from his chariot, you could have phrased that statement all kinds of different ways. The focus is on the chariot. It's on the tank. When the man got down from his chariot to meet you, is this the time to take money or to accept clothes or olive groves or vineyards? A few stories ago, who got a vineyard? Ahab. Or flocks or herds or male or female slaves? Who's been getting male and female slaves from Israel? Naaman. Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and your descendants forever. Then Gehazi went from Elisha's presence, and his skin was leprous. It had become as white as snow. And for years I remember this, and I always just saw the leprosy as some kind of punishment. I never saw before the connection between Gehazi and Naaman. Because here's the thing. What does it mean that the white skin disease of the pre-healing Naaman now clings to Gehazi and his descendants? See, leprosy isn't here just a skin disease. Leprosy is a social reality. And what it's saying is that Naaman, before his new birth, and Gehazi, even though they're separated because of the politics between Syria and Israel, even though they're separated because of the racial differences and the ethnic differences and the wealth differences and the military differences and all of those other differences, Naaman and Gehazi are the same. And they're bound by the same thing. Gehazi and Naaman are the same, but Gehazi wants to assert his moral privilege on the basis of his victim status and justify payment of something Gehazi hasn't done. Was Gehazi hurt by Naaman's miracle? No. Was he angry about it? Yes. Did Gehazi heal Naaman? No. We are all Gehazi. This is a story about us. We like to imagine ourselves as Naaman or as Elisha, but we're Gehazi. When I was growing up, I was taught in catechism, grace is God's riches at Christ's expense. That this is something we don't earn. You see, if you have status, you think you've earned it. That's natural. I've told you the story about the rigged Monopoly game. You rig a Monopoly game. You give some people $1,500 and 2 rolls of the dice. You give another group $700 and 1 roll of the dice. And as they go into the game, the obvious group is winning. And then if you ask them why they're winning, it's because I'm a really good player. No, it's because the game is rigged. You can have the status you think you've earned, or you can have the status paid for you by Christ's life, death, and resurrection. So if you look at this list, how much of this did you earn? Did you earn the genetics you were given? Did you earn your beauty or your talent or the parents you were born to? Did you earn any of this? If you feel superior over another because of some sociological victim status, which is the irony of the game itself, because if I can assert some victim status, now I've got victim privilegehood. You can't escape the game. Naaman realized he had received a gift he could never repay. This developed in him an allegiance to a God who gives unearned gifts. Followers of Jesus who saw that the quality of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection are empowered by the Holy Spirit do the same. Jesus says, no disciple is above his master. So what about us? What are our privileges? What are the scores we are keeping? What do we derive either from some advantage we were born with, or some advantage, some moral advantage we appropriate with the privilege game? Or do we recognize we are the same? And what's most important about me has been what's been done for me. And should I live out of that story? Let's pray. Lord, forgive us for being part of this game. Forgive us for perpetuating the game. Forgive us for imagining that we somehow, even in twisted ways, can appropriate some victim status and therefore rise above our enemies and look on their downfall. May we instead recognize that all of us are people looking for a way to get over others and to give up that game. Because one who actually had everything gave up everything for us and gave us new life. Help us to live out of that story instead. Hear our prayer. In the name of Jesus, amen. Would you stand?